In the previous video, we saw everything about group by. And so before we dive deeply into the exercises and the ins and outs of working with group by, I kind of wanted to show you how to work with it and what kind of questions we can answer and where some of the limitations are. Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do with SQL is navigate our data. We want to find answers to questions that can be asked by either the business, yourself, or others. Questions are central to the outcome of what we're trying to get. And so let's say I asked the question, hey, get me the most recent date that they got a salary bump. How would we go about that? Let's try to type it out. So if we did select, and we selected the employee number, comma, the salary, and we did that from the salaries table. So we have the employee number and we have their salary. The next thing we need to do is we need to get the from date. So with this, what do we know? Well, with this, we'll know their number, their salary, and the from date. And if we scroll down, we can see that the latest date for 10,001 was 2002. Knowing that, we can kind of now formulate roughly what our response should look like. And for 10,002, it should be 2001, and so forth and so forward. So knowing that, we can now go ahead and we can say, all right, I know how I want to group my data. So let's group by employee number, and then let's say salary. All right. And knowing that, we can then say, well, get me the max from date. What is this going to do? Well, let's see. Well, logically, when we group this way, we have to think about it in a way that kind of makes sense. So we're grouping by employee number and salary, meaning that our group is going to contain these two columns, which means that a group consists of a unique value, the employee number, but also the salary. And each salary is unique. You may come across a case where they may have switched roles and had the same exact salary, but most cases your salary is going to go forward or go backwards depending on. So should we be grouping by salary? I think we shouldn't. So let's remove that. Okay. So knowing that now, we can remove it there and remove it there. And let's execute that. Okay. So we're now seeing what we wanted to see. 2002, 2001, 2001. So we know at what date their latest and greatest salary bump was. And now if I were to ask you, well, how do I get the salary that correlates to that, right? Let's go ahead and look at what the data actually looks like. So over here, I made 3 different tables. The red background here symbolizes a grouping. So if I did employee number, first name, last name, and then I wanted to add the from date, well, what you can see here is that each logical group will consist of these columns. So this is a group. And then what we can see is that our from date actually has multiple values. 1990, 2002, etc., etc. So when we get the from date out of this, we can use max. What we end up doing here is determining the maximum of from date. And so when we do this, what we're basically going to get is this value. Now, if we go over here, here's the second part of this. What we know is that when we do groupings have to be unique. So if we added from date to our grouping and we had employee number, first name, last name, and from date in a group, each and every single group is going to be a single row. That's not what we want. How are we going to determine the max based off of this? Because each group only contains 1. Well, you could do the max based off of the total table, but the whole point of groupings is that we get the maximum from that group. So putting everything inside of the group by doesn't help. Let's look at that. We kind of saw it by putting salary in, but let's see what happens when we put from date there. So if we put from date here, well, then we know we can't run the analytical function because it's going to explode. Each group has to be unique. Because if I put max now around the from date, what you're actually going to see is that the maximum is just going to be the date that's in the group. There's only one date in the group, right? Each group is a singular line, right? So there is no actual grouping data. That is why grouping like this is so important, because you can see that we have two records. But if we go down here, and let's say we still grouped by the same data, but now we wanted to know with the from date and the salary, okay, we have groups. So let's check out how that would work. So if we did max salary, what's going to happen here? We know we have the right max from date based on us only grouping by employee number. We definitely have the right max date, 2002, 2001, etc., etc. But when we do max salary, okay, let's see, 2002, 88,859. Well, let's see what that looks like. And if we go look at their salary in 2002, it was 88,859. So this is correct. And most of these are probably correct, because getting the max salary, assuming that their salary only progresses forward, you can make a reasonable assumption that getting the max from date and the max salary, they're going to correlate. But how can we be certain that this relationship is actually correct? Well, we know now that with group by, we can get the right analytical data from the aggregate function from the from date. And if we just got the max salary, we're reasonably sure we're going to get their maximum salary throughout their career at the company. But we cannot know that this and this are related to each other. Let me explain why. So if we go down here and we look, what we can see here is we are grouping by employee number, first name, last name. And so we have these logical groups in time. 1880, 2002, 1880, 2000, 1880, 1980. I kept saying 1880. It's 1980. So with these groups, what we can see is that we have a salary. Now, assuming that salary progresses forward, we have 88,000 and 99,000 in 2002. But if we look at employee number 3, what we can see is that they actually went from making 90,000 to making 70,000. So in this case, if we ran the max against salary, but they got a salary decrease, well, now we're not going to know for certain if we got the right salary. And we learned so much about filtering. So you may be asking yourself, Mo, can I just apply a where clause or a having against the maximum salary or whatnot? Technically, you can't. Let's see what that looks like. If we go back over to our query and we look at it, well, if we just do this, we are fairly certain we have the most recent date. But what am I going to put in my having? Am I going to put having a max from date? Max from date related to what? What we actually want to do is we want to take the outcome of this and apply a filter in a different query. But we don't really have the tools to do this yet. We have the right answer here, but we can't reasonably relate the outcome of the date to the salary in the same query. And this is where it becomes tricky, right? So with group by, we have the ability to get a singular outcome. But when we want to relate that to the salary, well, this is where the question becomes difficult. And so there are different techniques of doing this, taking this data and applying it against a different query, or using this in some kind of way to retrieve that answer based on your from date. For now, we don't have the tools just yet to do this. But what we do have is the ability to understand how groupings work. Because if we look here, what we understand is that each logical grouping is making data available for running analytics against. We can reasonably say that we can get the most recent date that they got paid their latest salary. Or we can get their highest salary in time. But we can't yet determine what is the salary to the date in the same query. So with that said, what I want to give you here is that visualization of how group by works, how the data looks when you actually apply the groupings against the data, right? Knowing that we're getting this, we can obviously run our aggregate functions to get some kind of answer, but we can't run our aggregate functions to relate two columns of data to each other in the same exact query. And so we will be learning tools around doing this. But for now, what you have to understand is this mental model of grouping data and drawing something out of it, drawing an answer out of it. Because at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're getting data, we're getting a structure of data, we're drawing a conclusion out of it, and with that conclusion, we now have an answer, or we can do something else later on. The mental model of group by, the mental model of groupings, is what we need to take with us. And we also have to understand the shortcomings of group by. Because we can grab an answer out of it doesn't mean we can do everything in a singular query. There are limitations to what we can do in a single query, but there will be techniques and ways that we will learn down the line of how to reuse that and chain it on to do other things, right? Once we get an answer from a query, once we get data back, we can take that data and do other things. We just don't have those techniques yet. So keep in mind that we have to learn this mental model of grouping and retrieving data back. We want to understand how data works, right? We want to understand that when we get a result, that result, that subset of data that we're getting back, we can reuse later on.